Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of The Western Spirit. Today, we're with someone who I've gotten to know from afar over the last, I guess, since October 7th, more than, I guess that was the first time I heard of him. So today, we're going to speak with Ami Kozak. Ami is a comedian, a musician, a commentator, and host of the Ami's House podcast. And Ami, first of all, it's great to see you, and finally, I guess, know the person behind who we actually see online.
Good to be with you, Ariel. Thanks for having me.
So the first time, Ami, I think that I actually got to know something about you was when you were on Candace Owens' show, like I guess about a year ago or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I that was when, even though she, I guess, didn't like Israel, she wasn't willing to speak with people that were, I guess, semi-normal on Israel and even have a discussion about it. And that was the time, if I remember correctly, where she claimed that the Muslim quarter was like that people couldn't live, Jews couldn't live in the Muslim quarter, and Muslims couldn't live in the Jewish quarter, and all this kind of stuff, which made.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first question before I get into anything is, what is happening with just in the way you've been talking a lot about Tucker, Candace? We've seen lately Megyn Kelly, Marjorie Taylor Greene, all these, like, even the Hajj, I don't even know what their name is, the Hajj twins. There's like a sphere
Mm-hmm.
of the right in America that seems to be going like really full on. I don't like calling people anti-Semitic just because they don't like Israel, but it seems like it's going there, right?
When it comes to this category, this designation, I'm very careful to be very discerning because when you're playing near the edge of a cliff, right? The difference between going over the edge, where you step over, you fall to your death, you're no longer reachable, you're gone, versus on this side of the edge means you could look like you're standing anywhere. You're standing upright and you're there. And I use that sort of imagery to signal to our side of this conversation that we need to be very discerning when talking about this, because for so long, if you remember, it was a tactic of the far left to designate anybody talking about a certain subject or category as having a character flaw or being, or a personal attack that would be leveled against them. If you were talking about race in a particular way, you were racist. If you were talking about any kind of socioeconomic cultural issues, you would then be designated the purveyor of the most nefarious versions of those things. At the same time, depending on the context of the reality of what's going on around a particular subject, there are real nefarious actors. There are real anti-Semites. There are real racists, especially now. And it's really those people who ruin the party for all of us. The reason we really can't have these difficult conversations about Israel, about criticism of Israel, about anti-Semitism, is that there are, in fact, since October 7th, a lot of actual anti-Semites that are using this topic to unleash themselves. Now, the question is, who are those people? And if we want to have credibility in identifying them, then we can't just call everybody those things, because you will lose the ability to discern the bad actors, the good faith actors, the people who are intellectually curious versus the people who are nefarious. Now, sometimes someone starts off curious and ends up nefarious. Maybe they were like that all along. And it's just, you have to be discerning when just talking about the subject. And I think you have to be careful not to be too loose to use anti-Semite or racist at anything and everything. At the same time, people who engage in these topics also have to have standards. They also have to recognize when somebody is saying something problematic and be able to push back. So it goes both ways. But all that is to say, not everybody in this sort of category is the same at all. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time and identify when, Candace started out talking to me, it appeared to be she was going in a direction that was troubling, but a lot of people were immediately just doing hit pieces and writing smear articles and patting themselves on the back. And I took a different approach, which was to confront, to challenge, to react to these things, but actually do it in the form of a conversation. And at the time, in our first conversation, it was actually pretty constructive. And I thought, it was received well by the public. That was when she was still on the Daily Wire platform. About a year later, about a couple months later, she only kept going down this path and eventually just seemed to be using this whole topic as a manipulation, as a provocation. And I had one follow-up to sort of button things up and say, hey, what happened since our last conversation? I thought it went so well. I thought we made some progress and understood each other a little bit. And it didn't seem to go that way. And then she proved to be a lot more nefarious. And I think using this topic to just kind of be wicked, hurtful, And whether it's deep rooted anti-Semitism ideologically, it's certainly using it and using all of these tropes. It's pretty easy to see what it is. In the case of Tucker Carlson, I mean, he really traffics in a whole lot of confusion, demoralization, trying to take these third rail things and sort of create confusion around things that we already knew and understood were bad historically. Nazism, World War II, what happened there. And it's not like he's going to say, I think Hitler was great. He's going to say, do we know how bad he was? Like there's these presenting it in this way that creates a sort of planting.
Or Ami, can I just or that he lets his guests say the thing that he's too afraid to say. Like
yeah, I mean, he's perfectly willing to chew out Ted Cruz for not knowing the population of Iran, but when he has somebody in front of him who's saying really outlandish, crazy out of the box comments about World War II, about concentration camps, about death camps, then he'll be like, interesting. So it's just very selective where he decides to push back. And overall, to me, is he's a confusion artist, and that creates demoralization. In other words, a society and a young culture of young people that don't really know where the right and wrong is in something, and that becomes also very dangerous. And I think also, and then there's other people who, in the like sort of culturally conservative, new media conservative space, the Turning Points and Megyn Kelly and stuff. There's people who have, if I'm being gracious, they've made a career and had been successful at cultivating an audience based on their own authentic pursuit of what they think is true and not holding themselves back and not censoring themselves. So they have a compulsive instinct when they hear any kind of pushback on things they are saying, that must mean that there's something to hide. That must mean that something that's true is being concealed. And they have sort of the averse reaction to it. And then you have Megyn talking to Marjorie Taylor Greene and want to talk about these things. And they've said themselves, they get annoyed when they hear that pushback. Now, that's not necessarily the most mature response. Let's just remember also that for people outside the Jewish community or people who are Zionist and close to Israel at a personal level, the forest for the trees, they've been generally very, very good at defending Israel, at defending Jews, at speaking out against anti-Semitism. And so we have to realize that when they also venture into this territory of talking about these issues, hot button issues, or criticizing Israel or things like that, it's just not menschlich. It's not appropriate to just all of a sudden snap and say, well, you were only useful as long as you were 100% supportive. Having said that, I say that as to say the real people who crash the party and ruin it for all of us are the actual anti-Semites, the Nick Fuentes, the Jake Shields, Jackson Hinkles, these people out there who are trafficking in pure, unadulterated Jew hatred. It's those people we have to unite and channel against because it makes these conversations that much more difficult to have. It puts a lot of the Jews on edge for good reason, and it puts the people who want to talk about hot button issues about this subject, it makes everybody suspicious about even going there because a Nick Fuentes or a real proud anti-Semite will use the good names of a Megyn Kelly or a Charlie Kirk and say, you see, they're saying what I'm saying. So they'll echo those talking points to give credibility to actual hate and actual anti-Semitism. And that's not fair to Charlie Kirk and Megyn Kelly. It's not fair, but it's not fair to the Jews either. It's like they're the people causing a problem. It's like the difference is that when this was happening and coming from the left, I think they were manufacturing a lot of systemic racism, a lot of problems in the society that didn't exist in order to shut down conversation. But post-October 7th, everyone acknowledges this massive spike in Israel hatred, Jew hatred. So that's really there. I think it would be a lot harder to have a conversation about race, about gang violence, about stuff going on, let's say, within the Black community or any other minority community, if there was actual persecution of those minorities going on at the time. If there were lynchings all across the country of African Americans pre-October 7th, if that was going on, it would have been very hard to have conversations about, like, reasonable conversations about problems because it's being used by actual racists. So I think there's a whole confusion going on there, and both sides need to be very discerning as to what the source of the problem with this conversation is. And I don't think it's the reactionary Zionist Jews, and I don't think it's the good faith actors who want to talk about these issues with nuance. It's the bad faith actors. That's the
But I'll tell you what, in a way, maybe I do disagree with you, is that the Nick Fuentes or Jackson Hinkle, these people, no one really, I mean, obviously there's always, like, when I grew up in the States as a young kid in Brooklyn, I don't remember, and in Crown Heights, I was there as a little child for the Crown Heights riots, and so there was always some Jew hatred, and in the Black community where we were, there was always this, like, there is a section of not the Jesse Jackson, the Louis Farrakhan and those types of people, but we always looked at anti-Semitism as a fringe, I guess, from my point of view, issue in America. Meaning, you always had a fringe of the black community, and then you had these like neo-Nazis living somewhere in like a farm in the South somewhere that no one took seriously. And those were, we can say, in the online sphere, maybe a Nick Fuentes that has a lot of this so like people that are depressed and have no girlfriend and no friends, and they find Nick Fuentes and he solves their problems because the Jews are everything. But most people aren't there, which is why it's so scary that it's become mainstream, which is why it's so scary to me that people like some of the people you mentioned that are mainstream conservative, whatever voices, are echoing some of the things that these crazies are saying. So we can say, like, we should make the difference, we shouldn't make the difference. But a lot of the things they've said, these people have never said before October 7th. So, like, for example, the whole thing with APAC, this like nonstop, like, and don't get me wrong, I don't think that the US, I think it would be for Israel's benefit if the US stopped funding Israel. Like, in a lot of ways, I think it's a bad deal for Israel. And even just PR wise, it's a bad deal. But even militarily and equipment wise, we're stuck into US contracts, whatever. My point is that it's a legitimate thing discussion to have, but it was never had before October 7th. A lot of these people, like Megyn Kelly, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I don't remember any of them ever talking about any of this before October 7th. Suddenly, this wave of Israel hatred comes in, and they're all looking to try to, it seems to me, to find ways to talk about where Israel is in the wrong. So maybe Israel is in the wrong in a lot of these things, but you're finding it out now. Now is when you're going to, while everyone's piling on, now is the time to talk about these things. So I don't think it's the right time. Now's the time to not talk about these things and wait for Israel to be like at least semi in a good place where we can negotiate what's right to do with American aid, let's say. Like, now the whole world's trying to kill Israel. So let's wait a minute.
I agree with you. I think, again, discernment requires that there's a difference between somebody willingly putting out anti Semitic ideas and tropes in order to hurt Jews, discredit Israel, and others unwillingly or subconsciously stepping into that pathology because it's become so mainstream in the conversation, because this has become the center of pop culture, internet culture, Jews, Israel. This was a fringe sort of topic for years that people in our community discussed, but it's there. And so you cover it. And a lot of things, you're right, have been mainstream. But who have they really been mainstreamed by so that they find themselves coming out of the mouths of otherwise reasonable people? Even like, I would say, sometimes things that get repeated so much, this idea of APAC getting repeated so much that even good faith actors say, well, I guess it seems like APAC's just like controlling everything. What's that all about? They're asking these questions. It's piquing their curiosity. Who's been the ones, really seeding that and putting that out there? So there's a difference between those willingly doing it and working hard to do it and consciously doing it, and people curious and accidentally stepping into dangerous pathology, which I think is the case with a Joe Rogan who's sitting there and may not be familiar with David Irving or the revisionism or some of this stuff. There are people who are now asking these questions, even Theo Von, who's like, I'm a fan of some of these comedians, and I think they're good-hearted, and I think they mean well. But again, this stuff has now been saturated, this sort of Israel pile-on. And so now you're not just trying to be a blind loyalist, and you don't want to look like you're just blindly supporting Israel without thinking about it. So you're left with these options. The only way to seem like you're thinking about this nuanced wise is to inadvertently perpetuate some of the tropes that are already become so standardized. There's a difference between those who say, now the only way now to have this conversation is to ask questions about APAC. That's where the Overton window, the needle has moved so far that now you have to start in a place that's already troubling. Is that the fault of the people trying to engage in it? Or is it the fault of the common enemy, which are the nefarious bad faith actors who've put it there? I'm not trying to take away accountability from anybody, but there's an awareness. And that's a very different position to take than just calling Megyn Kelly the same thing you've been calling Nick Fuentes. If you want the term anti-Semitism to have any word, any meaning, any power, then doing that is the most unproductive and false thing to do. Also, I think that, like, I think anybody can say an idea that may have anti-Semitic undertones or be animated by an anti-Semitic subtext or reality. Well, like, this idea comes from something, but somebody could say it not realizing that and not having any hatred at all or ill will towards Jews, but perpetuated an idea like, oh, like what is it with Jews and banking? Like I feel like they're all over banking. Like that's what I've heard. That's what's being said. Now that's, you know, there's a lot of Jews in a certain industry, and you can correct the misperception as to why that is. But I think not everybody saying that idea is animated by the same force. You know, there are people animating that. If a Nick Fuentes or an anti-Semite online is trying to tell you that, and therefore there's all these you're making, and they're controlling your life, and they're controlling our government, you know, but the unfortunate negative externality is that it becomes so mainstreamed and tolerated that it wears off. And I think we have to have the same standard of how much we tolerate it, but it's very different than reacting to everybody with such a broad brush that you'll lose all resolution on this topic.
Yes, I agree, and I also want to say I really love Megyn Kelly. I'm pretty much a regular listener in the shower to her show, and which is why it's a little bit it's too much information. But my point is that
wherever you want to watch it.
Yes, my point is that it's like it was disappointing in a way because I have no problem with these conversations. On the contrary, I like having them, but I like when
in a vacuum, though. In a vacuum,
right? I like when there's pushback. You know, she says crazy things. Marjorie Taylor Greene, give her a little pushback.
But your own confirmation bias leads you to ignore any pushback. You didn't see any of it because you were waiting for something that was satisfying to you and even to me. I'm aware of that. She did say, well, it's all Hamas propaganda. Everything out of Gaza is Hamas propaganda. She had Marjorie Taylor Greene have to admit it's Hamas's fault. They're responsible. Like, these are the things that we've been trying to get that message across of what's really going on here. Megyn Kelly did say that. She emphasized that. And then she said some things that were a little bit outside of that is an honest interpretation of where she's at. She's like, look, at the end of the day, though, people are pushing me into one direction or another, and like, this is where I'm at. And for someone who's not Jewish, I think she's Catholic, and maybe, you know, it's not like people have a hierarchy of values, and maybe Israel's like third for Megyn Kelly, where it's second or first for us. I think we're big boys and girls that we can accept that. For someone who's not Jewish and maybe didn't live in Israel for a year like I did after high school and doesn't have family there going through this, but is still pretty much on the right side of this, I can appreciate the overall, you know, majority support that she's been showing. And she said all those things, even in the Marjorie Taylor Greene interview. I have my frustrations too. I can acknowledge that. But still, like, your own and my own confirmation biases are ignoring the parts where she said, yeah, but, you know, all those images you're seeing, Marjorie, why do you call it a genocide? Because, like, all those images that were coming out, like, are all through the Hamas propaganda wing, which is true. And she's like, yeah, well, I guess so. I guess, like, we don't know what's going on. Now, you can make fun of Marjorie if you want. It's fine. I do. And like, because she keeps calling it these things, like it's this genociding. And I just think, like, what's going on there? It's just, we don't know. And then she says, we don't know. And then she claims to know. But like, Megyn did push back. Is it satisfactory? Is it not? Okay, but these people are not like pawns and tools in our world to do and say exactly what we want.
Okay, you changed my mind. That's it. I love Megyn back.
I'm just saying, that's what I'm saying. Like, you know, we got to be, look, the war's gone on for 23 months. Okay. And this is the problem. Like, in a 23-month window, you know, one could say we can militarily critique Israel for saying maybe you should have done it this way. Maybe it should have been more aggressive up front, so that people can draw a clear connection between what happened on October 7th to what's happening now. Is it going in the right direction? Are the strategic goals aligned? These are all like fair critiques. I would also say that, like, maybe Israel should stop trying to prioritize approval over victory. And maybe that constant back and forth, maybe it has real world consequences. It's above my pay grade and purview to know how the military can make tactical decisions based on American approval, to what extent it's relying on that. Everyone thinks Israel controls America. It's really the other way around. Israel cannot operate without America's say so in a lot of different regards. When in a lot of different, from my understanding, Biden being president in the beginning saying, why did Israel have to evacuate? If Israel controls America, why did Israel have to evacuate its entire northern population, hundreds of thousands of people, for 11 months as it continued to be attacked by Hezbollah, and they had to simply wait? It's, you know, I've heard from someone in the IDF pretty high up that, you know, there's 2 American aircraft carriers outside of Israel that would not approve strikes into Lebanon because they did not want an escalation. Now, who controls who? While Israeli citizens have to hide out and stay in bunkers and motels and hotels away from their families, away from their communities, away from their life for 11 months. Is that Israel controlling America or the other way around? In any event, you know, these are the things we know, and sometimes we take for granted how connected and close and informed we are on an issue at a very personal level. And then the people who have other things in their life and other priorities, and they're supportive, but they're not blindly loyal. They don't have necessarily a personal family connection. They're sympathetic, but don't confuse the two because, so it's going to happen. And this is sometimes the consequence of 23 months of a difficult situation in which Israel's trying to rescue hostages. They're trying to win. And again, I always take the position of not prioritizing image and approval over victory. If you prioritize victory over those things, I think you'll get a fair amount of both in the long run. But I guarantee you, like most of these people, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they don't even care about Palestinians. They don't care about this that much. And so when it's thrown in their face and it's constantly the subject of things, I think it's incumbent upon everybody to ask themselves, why is this constantly in front of my face? Maybe that's saying something about what the agenda is here of people trying to smear Israel. Like, that's a fair question. I feel like Megyn's asked that question before. But that's something everyone should be aware of. The fact is, why are we still talking about this? Is that really because of Israel or because of Israel's enemies? All fair questions. But the worst thing you can do, I think, in that scenario is to ignore all the things she said that you would agree with, tuck it over here and say, yeah, but once she went off of there, that invalidates the whole interview. I'm not making full excuses, but I'm trying to just look a little more discerning and check my own reactionary bias because we all have it. And her reactionary bias is, hey, if you criticize me on this, I'm just going to move further away. That's just how human beings work. Not everybody's this rational actor. You hear this stuff and you're like, okay, you know what? I'm going to keep going in that direction. I'm going to have Marjorie Taylor Greene on. I'm going to have these people on because you've told me I can't. And my whole life, I've been told in the way that I can't. When I push back against being told what I can't do, I come out successful at the other end and I follow my conscience and my curiosity. Don't tell me what I can and cannot do. And I think that that's a human posture that we all have to be aware of, and it's not a matter of, being morally compromised or betraying or, losing people. I think everyone's a human being, everyone's a person. So let's be aware of those things, even though we're in a vulnerable state and a hyper-reactive state.
Agreed. You changed my mind a little bit. I'll say one thing that I had spoken not too long ago, and I think you did too, with James Lindsay about the woke right whole thing. And I think in a way maybe this is like a different way of looking at it, in the sense that it's not maybe anti-Semitic per se, a lot of these people. And I'm talking more about the, I guess, Candace people, Tucker even, who I forgot who we talked about when I spoke with him, but a lot of these people, he says, are basically reactionary wokists, I guess, in the way that I understand him. Meaning, if the woke left for years was telling us, like you said, we can't, everything is looked at race, identity politics, white people are all the way at the bottom of the privilege poll, so they're privileged, meaning they don't get anything in this privileged economy. and people, and so then they look at it, these people, and just turn the whole thing on its head. We want wokeism, but we want it to work for us. And so the Jews in both cases are in the worst place possible, because in the woke left, the Jews are white adjacent, basically. Like, we're very successful, pretty much. We make more money on average than most other people. We're more educated. We're in politics overrepresented, all this kind of stuff. And on the woke right, I guess Jews, and it's true, are mostly to the left. And so they look at us as being allies of their quote unquote enemies. And so there's like a convergence of like both wokes hating the Jews. And not because, right, and not because specifically because we're Jewish, meaning they just hate us. A lot of them do, but a lot of them also, it's just because they hate all the people that they're supposed to hate, and we're just one of those people. And it's like, do you agree with that? Like, it's like you see it on different sides. They're using sometimes the same exact language, people on the far left and on the far right, and they're meeting in the middle.
This episode is brought to you by Ayn Rand Center Israel. We meet every alternate Friday to study and discuss the philosophy of Ayn Rand, author of The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. The topics range from ethics to politics, reason versus faith, aesthetics, psychology, and much, much more. This is the only place in Israel where Ayn Rand's unique philosophy is accessible to you, and you're welcome to come learn all about it. It's a great opportunity to learn and meet really interesting people. Attendance is free, and first-timers get a free book. We meet every alternate Friday at the WeWork in Sarona Market, and we like to keep the intellectual discussion going afterwards with some great food and drinks. Click the link for more info on Ayn Rand Center Israel.
Yeah, they're both woke in that this is just a tribal identitarian reaction to what the woke left was doing. The woke left was obsessed with identity politics. Your race and immutable characteristics were paramount to you and must determine what you believe. And they put whites on the bottom. And so now whites are putting themselves on the top, and they're going to play that game. Jordan Peterson warned about it for years, that you're going to see a reaction of the identitarian right, and it won't be pretty. And he's right about that. It's as ugly as can be. Jews don't fit neatly into those categories because, like you said, to the left, the successful minority is a very upsetting phenomenon, especially with Jews, because it disproves the notion that all the problems of marginalized groups are systemic, are from a government that is racist and discriminatory. So how can successful minorities exist in that world if it's all racism that holds people back? Because in spite of that, in spite of any kind of marginalization, historical oppression, the fact that Jews have succeeded dispels that notion, and that's upsetting. So we are white. We then become white. We are white colonizers, oppressors. Not to the woke right. Yeah, and the woke left views everything in those terms of these movements of oppressor, oppressed, patriarchy, racism, systemic racism. On the woke right, it's the exact same thing with one difference. Basically, their anti-Semitism is a lot more explicit, and they claim to believe in all those things that the woke left is against, like capitalism, like a strong patriarchy. They claim to believe in a lot of these things, or freedom even, but it's being kept from us by the Jews. It's being kept from us by a powerful cabal that's controlling everything. And therefore Jews are either these left-wing, on the woke right, it's every single movement that we're against is 5 degrees of separation away, as Gad Saad said, from the Jews, open borders, mass immigration. But it's the left-wing Jews that let them in. All these the fact that Jews are represented in different levels of intellectual life and prominence in society positions Jews to be blamed for all these things, because you can find Jews on the left that are successful. You can find Jews on the right that are successful. You give me these left-wing ideologues who were Jewish, a Soros or whoever. You can also find, give me a Milton Friedman, Murray Rothbard, give me anybody. If you're represented in prominent areas of intellectual, scientific, business life, then you can find the perfect scapegoat depending on what your issue is. So they use that as the ultimate scapegoat. And ultimately what unites the woke left and the woke right is accountability. They do not take accountability for their own shortcomings, for their own failures, for their own lives. They scapegoat. Now the left just finds one scapegoat in the form of the oppressor, the patriarchy, capitalism, colonialism. That's the reason why I'm failing, why society's failing. And the woke right blames the Jews and all the things the Jews control, like capitalism, like our banking, like our government. And therefore, they never have to blame themselves. They never have to take accountability for their own shortcomings, their own failures. And that's what really makes it woke. It's that there's nothing I'm doing, there's nothing I can control about my own life. It's all in the hands of these other people who are controlling us. On the left, it's this racist, systemically racist society. We can't fight it. It's amorphous. It's everywhere. It's internal. It's in every white person. So we need a revolution to burn it down. And on the woke right, it's in all these Jews that you don't see hiding behind everything. So we need to destroy them and burn it down and restore something else, some kind of other utopia. Exactly the same animating ideas and principles that are destructive and dangerous.
Ami, one other thing also that I was thinking as I was coming to talk to you, and I asked a friend that also follows you a lot, so you have a lot of followers in Israel too, and we were talking about the fact that it seems that there's sort of, in the last few years, we noticed it after October 7th, but I assume it's been there way before, is this almost like knee-jerk reaction to conspiracies. So people, instead of looking at, you would think online you have all the facts in front of you, you have all the sources. It's not like you have one paper that comes to your house and you can't look at anything else like you did 30, 40 years ago. You have literally on the palm of your hand all of the sources. And yet people are drawn into these conspiracies about everything. Literally, when you go online, you could find people that believe in every single crazy, wacky conspiracy ever, and it gets traction. If like a famous person will retweet a conspiracy theory, more people will believe it, and it spirals, and it's just a weird, like, how do you have an explanation of why, I guess, the younger generation, people that watch you, for example, or that listen to you, a lot of them will have a tendency, just their age group, maybe not them specifically, our age group, my age group, I don't know how old you are, we have like more than our fathers to just believe wild, crazy stuff. If they make us feel better, maybe, I don't know.
I think there's a couple things going on. In the more recent development, like what you see on college campus, for example, and the encampment movement, there's always been this element within our universities, I think going back to the 70s, of an administrative professoriate class that is anti-Western. And so the first conspiracy, so to speak, is that you young people have been lied to. We're the adults in the room now. Your families have lied to you. America, Israel, the West are the bad guys. Ooh, everything you've been told about the goodness of this country, the virtue of this country, the virtue of Western values, the superiority of Western values, of this freedom and tolerance is actually this repressive, oppressive force of the world. We're the ones who are the true evils. And so when you get to college and you get that kind of left-wing indoctrination that's hostile to the West, that's sort of the first plot twist. In a sense, it is conspiratorial, even though I generally track conspiracies as being more of a right-wing phenomenon. Like, when the left-wing version of that is telling all these kids who've grown up with so much and so much material comfort that they take it for granted, that they must see that the things that are missing in society, things that are missing in life, there must be someone to blame. Everything that we have is just there. That's just supposed to be there. That's sort of how you get the Zoran Mamdani movement, the college encampment movement that looks at all this excess, all this material comfort, and just takes it all for granted. Sort of F you mom energy. There must be something wrong. And then when they have no purpose or direction or orientation, who can I blame for this? And that comes from comfort, I think, and looking to the adults in the room. The last adults you see before you enter the world are disgruntled administrators and professors who warp your mind, and the last people they have that power grab and power dynamic over are these young, impressionable minds that can make them feel relevant as intellectuals who should be more successful, should have more influence, should have more impact. Unlike the C students and B students they grew up with, who are in finance, who are in industry, who are producing things outside of the university in the ivory tower. I think you have that dynamic. So that's one bucket, one area of sort of where conspiracy, I think, thrives, even though they wouldn't frame it that way. It's this idea that everything that you thought is not true. Now, if you go back a little bit to like the more recent, I think, traumas that we've collectively experienced, you have COVID, BLM, Donald Trump. You have a couple of different major things that you never thought could be true and could happen that happened. Take Trump. There's a couple of things about Trump that one never thought could be true that ended up happening. One being that he became the president. And not only that, like popularly so, like, and well regarded by lots and lots of people, that there were millions and millions of people that actually did support him and that you couldn't talk about it. Now, what has the recipe of conspiracy, right? This idea that, well, a lot of people actually did like Trump and they didn't hate him and they didn't think he was a monster, but they were made to believe that there was this consent in the masses that he's evil, especially if you lived on the coast, if you lived in LA or New York, if you didn't live in Trump country. But even the Rust Belt, there was, in 2016, a hidden vote for Trump. People couldn't say it out loud, but they believed it. That was Trump 2016, this real big paradigm shift I noticed where, like, what has the hallmark of conspiracy, where a lot of people are kind of believing something, but nobody wants to accept that it's true. Everyone's shutting it down. That's the first sort of nudge into conspiracy thinking I started to see happen, where Trump wins in 2016 and everybody thought the consent was Hillary Clinton has this in the bag. To think he would win, you were crazy. You were called crazy for thinking Trump was going to win. Then he did. What was the next thing? COVID. You were called crazy if you didn't accept whole cloth the COVID narrative that this came from a wet market. It wasn't in the lab. You had to socially distance or you were going to kill everybody. And this was going to, and you would never think it would actually get that far, that we'd be locking down. What, we're going to lock down the entire world? Apparently we are actually going to do that. And it did happen. Is that the best idea? Do we need to keep kids out of school for a year and a half? Didn't matter. And years later, we come to find out all those suspicions were validated and true. And any suspicions about vaccines and side effects and harm are coming out now to be validated. So again, it what the damage of that kind of thing is a loss of trust in institutions. And that ties into BLM, because the second the George Floyd thing happened, all of the concerns about COVID went out the window. And you realize that this whole movement was ideologically and politically driven. And now you're like, wait a minute, there's another massive conspiracy that was just affirmed and validated to be true, that this was actually just some political ideological thing. And it wasn't about science, and it wasn't about health concerns and public health, because the second there were mass protests in the street for BLM, everybody said, it's okay. That we can tolerate. Or, Gavin Newsom is discovered at a restaurant, in one of the harsher lockdown states, he's socializing. So people lost trust in sort of that hierarchy of institutions, of trust, that the grownups know what they're doing, the leadership knows what they're doing. I can trust what's being reported to me in the news, those kind of things. So I think Trump, for better or worse, plus COVID, for better or worse, did introduce this idea of people doing their own research and going with their gut and going with conspiracy. And that has a positive element to it, in that it can, and if you look at even what was happening with Twitter at the time, you couldn't talk about things openly. You were kicked off social media. You were shut down. YouTube, there was no place to go. So I think it created this sort of threshold that burst post-Trump 2024 that was sort of, I think, brought people into the fold to say, we were validated by our conspiratorial thinking for the last few years. It's the institutions that are corrupted. It's the establishment that's corrupted. It's the legacy that's corrupted. The problem is now Israel on October 7th, and how that gets introduced into this whole framework with all this people ripe for conspiratorial thinking. We're in the Tower of Babel. Like, Tower of Babel has now upon us. No one can talk to each other. No one knows how to speak the same language anymore. No one can look at things, footage, and assess it correctly, whether it's October 7th footage, which just shows the evil proudly, and then the images of war that follows, that gets processed through different things, and people equate to October 7th, and therefore, any kind of party line, any kind of thing that's coming out of any government or whatever, there's just a full culture of distrust. And that I think is my diagnosis as to where it all sort of brewed from. Before that, things were fairly regular,
Well, people believed that Elvis was still alive and all this stuff in America, but yeah, there was always, America always had, like, in a good way, like, people weren't towing the line. There was always, like, America had that individualistic thing, which is very, and I'm very liberal in the libertarian sort of sense. So, so I think different than Israel. I wish Israel was more libertarian, but we're not going to get there anytime soon. But one thing that I think is also playing here is that, and we see this with the Sydney Sweeney ad. I'll just add that it seems maybe that it doesn't have anything to do with what we.
You watch that in the shower too, or what did you do?
Well, I don't tell my wife, but my point is that I can't watch anything. I'm blind, but I could listen to it. But
Sydney Sweeney Braille ad was very good.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'm saying is that when I came to the US, like, to visit my dad, like 2-3 years ago, when you would put on the TV, you wouldn't see any white people in any commercials. Literally no white people, and usually no men. And if they were men, they were either gay or very feminine in the way they presented themselves. And usually all of the people were like indigenous people and like the stereotypical type of the minority community. And this was, for, I assume, for a very long time, the way things just were. And if you would put a white person on, I'm just guessing, you as a company on your commercial, you would be taking a chance. You would be actually making a dangerous move. Like, why take the chance? Why put myself out there? And people will say I'm racist because I put Sydney Sweeney out there. I could put a model that's a black model or whatever. And I think the fact that they did go with a white model that's not actually overweight, because that was another thing. You could put a white person on, but he has to be overweight, or she has to be with some deformation or something, like, so you're like, she's white, but she's not like all the other whiteys. But I think that the fact that they felt comfortable doing this now shows that a lot of the things, in a good way and in a bad way, that were considered taboo up like in the past decade or so are over. And so it allows people to do a lot of good. So I'm very pro putting white people in ads, because why not? People should be able to say whatever they want. But on the other hand, it allows people a gateway to also say things and do things that aren't good. And I think that's, or even to show the beliefs they had inwardly and were embarrassed to say, like you said, with Trump, it was a bad thing. But with other things, maybe it's good that you don't give your hateful rhetoric and stupidity out there for the public to see. Like, it's like,
yeah, people confuse these principles of free speech as a principle that limits the government from arresting people for offensive speech, equating that to we should say anything. Barry Weiss said this really well. We came from a time where everything was taboo and you couldn't say anything, to now where everything is transgressive and you should say everything. Now, we're talking about common decency and navigating each other and having constructive, fruitful conversations and dialogue. We can be discerning, and you can judge speech as, hey, that's not appropriate, that's not cool. That doesn't mean you want that person locked up and sent to prison. That's what free speech is. Now, I can understand that if things go so far where we can't tolerate any kind of ideas that are different than our own, then you could eventually, if politics is downstream from culture, the whole problem with cancel culture is you're creating a society, a culture by which people can't handle ideas that they disagree with. Exactly. And then eventually that could dangerously lead to legislation. So I get the push and pull. But again, if you can't have clear, sort of boundaries over what's socially acceptable, not legally acceptable, but just socially acceptable, then you lose the ability to have the conversations you want to have. If we want to make racist jokes and do offensive humor, then when you're not joking, you shouldn't be racist. You understand? So racist jokes and edgy humor and edgy art, that's all good, provided the society it's being fed to isn't racist and isn't actually believing those things as serious ideas. Kanye West makes a song, HH, and does Sieg Heils and puts Hitler's speech at the end. What's really wrong with that song? I actually don't think it's the song. It's the fact that Kanye West in real life is anti-Semitic and perpetuating anti-Semitism and spreading it. And then he makes a song that reflects ideas that he actually believes. That is the problem. And people get confused. Oh, what's the wrong with the song? It's edgy, it's cool, it's catchy. Well, are you ignoring who's making it and why? Django Unchained had N-words all over the script. People got upset about it. I didn't see what the issue was, given the fact that Quentin Tarantino was making a movie portraying a very racist reality that was almost exaggerately so, to give you a sense of just how absurd it was. In real life, he's not a racist. And I think he has a strong affinity. He works with all these black actors all the time. In real life, if Quentin Tarantino in real life was part of the KKK and was racist, that movie would have resonated very differently to the masses, as it should have. Because then you're like, if David Duke made Django, you'd read it very differently. And so people are just so confused by reality and principle and why these principles are there. Yes, offensive speech, sure. And I'm not saying anyone should be arrested for offensive speech, but that doesn't mean we have to be completely non-judgmental and not be able to be critical and push back. It goes both ways. Free speech provides that when you hear something offensive, you can tolerate it legally, but you can push back against it philosophically.
It's almost like,
within society itself. It's like these people are just as triggered by
right.
criticism as the ones being offended.
It's almost like, I remember when Candace was let go by Daily Wire and people said, and I think even she alluded to it, oh, now they're against free speech. Well, no, you don't. Free speech doesn't mean you have to be, employed by someone to say things that the employer doesn't agree with. You can say it whatever you want. You don't have to say it on someone else's platform. I guess that
free speech means you're free. You're protected from legal consequences, not any consequence.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So then it leads me to my last segment that I wanted to talk with you about is Jews in the US. So like I said, I came to Israel at the age of 14. Long story short, I've been here ever since. And when I grew up, being a Jew in the US, and I grew up in an ultra-Orthodox community, so it's a little bit different than a lot of other, I guess, Jews in the US. But what does it mean? How different is it, in your opinion, for a Jew in Israel that wants to understand what it does it feel like to be a Jew in America nowadays? Is it really different than when I was growing up? Is it really more scary to walk the streets as a Jewish person? Should I be worried about putting a yarmulke on in Manhattan or somewhere? Like, do people, is it really that scary, or are we overblowing things?
Oh, well, I think the idea of sounding the alarm on something is that the danger is not there yet. It's looming. It's coming. So it doesn't disprove one's concerns to say, it's fine. You walk down the street with the kippah on. But that's the whole point of being cautious and sounding the alarm. It's that something is to come, and that there have been patterns of this throughout history. Had there never been pogroms, a Holocaust, a situation that echoes very ominously where we are right now, then I would say, yeah, they're being paranoid. In fact, in Trump 2016 era, there were a lot of Jews on the left who were, I thought Trump deranged and claiming that Nazis were everywhere. White supremacy was on the rise. And I said, what are you talking about? And I wasn't wrong then. There's a few guys with tiki torches, and the fact that you're calling Trump a white supremacist because he said find people on both sides, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and white supremacists. They should be condemned totally. Everybody leaves that part out. So I thought most of the time, if anything, the excesses and worst ideas of the far left were much more dangerous and much more ascendant in the culture. If you watch Disney Plus, you didn't see KKK cartoons out there trying to influence kids. You don't see across the universities a bunch of white supremacist professors. So that still stands today. I think those things are all still there. What you have now, post October 7th, is in fact, and I think people who sounded the alarms then when it wasn't such an issue, I think make it harder now to sound the alarm. But what you have now is in fact this ascendant, woke right, mainstreaming of anti-Semitism, the Overton window. Pair that with, say what you want about the dangers of a Jew living in Israel. There are no hostage posters ripped down in Tel Aviv. There are none. You do not see demonstrators from Hebrew U demanding that you dismantle the entire state of Israel, with the exception of a few crazy journalists. You got Gideon Levy and a few people saying, we have to all leave, let's go. You have a few people, but for the most part, the protest movements in Israel, even the furthest left you go, doesn't demand destroying Israel and destroying Israelis and not returning the hostages. Or that Israel planned, that's as far as it gets. Here, if you go to Washington Square Park, you'll find Hamas supporters, whether they know it or not. You'll find people who've ripped down posters or supported it or want to kick out all the Zio scum, using all the same anti-Semitic language of the past in the form of Zionists so they can say it. You see Israelis being kicked out of restaurants for speaking Hebrew, people in class who can't speak Hebrew. Now, I wear a yarmulke in public. I think it's not at the point where Jews are being accosted and assaulted every day all over the place. But again, when you notice this pattern, that's when you're sounding the alarm on something. It's not for things that are happening every second of every day. It's for things that look like they're going to get worse with time and are increasingly showing signs of doing so. And so to be a Jew in the diaspora outside of Israel, yeah, it's kind of terrifying because for the very first time, you don't wonder how past discrimination took place and how it built up. You don't wonder anymore how Jews were rounded up in Europe in the 1930s as a first world developed country. Oh, it all started like this in a developed, civilized world. We see people screaming, Zionists on this subway, get off. Zio scum, throw out, and images of trash portraying Zionists as vermin, as dirty. It's not the way any other conflict has ever been framed or portrayed. It's only this same language that's coming up. I don't drink at Starbucks. Screw their Zionist dirty water. They're this weird thing about dirtying society. I mean, this has all happened before, many, many times. And so that's what it feels like. You're wondering, wow, Zoran Mamdani, we're about to get an Islamist Marxist mayor of New York City who proudly was with SJP and is for dismantling Israel, and he is, and doesn't use the term globalize the intifada anymore, discourages the term, but does he support the actual intifada? Just ask him. I don't know. He's not really pressed past the point of one rebuttal, I think he supports all these things. I think on October 7th, he calls it resistance. I think that's where he's at. That's where things are at. And people are willingly or subconsciously allowing it to happen. It's not just the barbarians at the gates that are the problem. It's those who stupidly, naively.
And how do you explain that? I just saw a poll that like 40% of Jews in New York City are considering voting for Mamdani. Like, what is the so again, I grew up in like a different New York City. So I grew up in Brooklyn. I spoke Yiddish in my yeshiva, and like it's like a different world, I guess, from a liberal Jew in Manhattan. And okay, but how do you get to a place where as a young Jew you're actually considering to vote for someone who, like you said, maybe doesn't use the words, or he's smart about like manipulating like what words or how he says the things, but he was for in the organization, like you said, Student for Justice in Palestine. We all know who they are. He's palling around with like the most radical people. Linda Sarsour is like one of his top people in his campaign, and yet
I think
so
there's a
many
couple of
Jews.
explanations. There's a couple of explanations for it. I mean, I think there's a deep cultural history within the Jewish community at large, and I'll speak sloppily about this because why not? It's just that there's a culture of appeasement, of this adaptable instinct to say, "Oh, we're not like the ones like that. We want to get along. We want you to be okay with us. We're not going to say what everybody's saying about you. Like, accept us." There's certainly that element of it that you see, spring up in the face of adversity rather than fighting it in the face of hostility. There's an instinct to fight it and challenge it, which is what I would want to do, or to appease it and say, we're not going to be any trouble. In fact, we're going to give you cover. So, like, if we can, dispel these notions coming at you. The other thing that's going on, first of all, is that being Jewish is not just a race. You're not just like born Jewish and that's all there is to it. Ethnicity. It's not just something you ethnically have as a card that you could just use to provide coverage for those who would do damage to a lot of Jewish people. Being Jewish also involves the practice of Judaism, the belonging to a Jewish community, having a Jewish family, having a sense of Jewish consciousness. And I don't think a lot of those people in that 40% stat that you talk about, I would venture to guess and assume that to the extent that their Jewish identity is that central and paramount in their life, I would wonder about that. I think more often it's liberalism or social justice or these other values and ideas that aren't exclusively Jewish are much more central to their identity. And their Judaism and Jewish identity is something they were born with, something they ethnically have. It makes them not Christian. But beyond that, I don't know, find me the religious affiliated, and I'm not trying to discriminate or I'm not trying to like have any kind of superiority complex as to that the more religious Jews are more Jewish than the ethnically Jewish people. But as far as Judaism and the involvement of Judaism in life, just as a matter of objective fact, I would say that the Hasidic communities, the Orthodox communities, by very nature, Judaism and being part of a Jewish community plays a far more central role to them and the preservation of that than someone who was raised ethnically, had an ethnic background, had a bar mitzvah, and I don't know, maybe they went off and found themselves attached to other ideas and other movements that aren't particularly Jewish, liberalism, Marxism, communism, whatever that is. So for them to then say, put their Jewish card all of a sudden as being the paramount core of their identity when it suits defending someone who's dangerous for Jews, I'd take issue with that.
Ami, I want to give you an anecdote that you can use if you want. I came to New York for a week for a small visit, and I wrote an article about a conference that was there. And I said, okay, I'll interview some interesting people when I come to New York. And someone said, why don't you interview the leader of Reform Judaism in America? Rabbi Jacobs, he lives in New York, the leader of the Reform Judaism in Canada and the US, which is the largest Jewish affiliate. They have, I think, over 1 million plus members. And anyway, so I interviewed him. Very nice guy. And he admitted to me, like, not admitted, like he said it, it wasn't like a secret, that they have a problem with a lot of the young people, that they are the ones of the people that grew up as Reform Jews, that they are the leaders or participants in these protests against Israel. Now, this is not 23 months after October 7th, where people are being like what we said during this whole conversation. This was literally, I would say, maybe like 6 months after October 7th. So this is like it's all very, very fresh. And still, he's telling me at that time that they have an issue in the congregation. At that congregations, people are still a little bit apprehensive about speaking about Israel, because there are people in the pews, so to speak, in the synagogues, that are against Israel.
Well,
And
the idea of anything, there's a couple of things. When a lot of these people happen to also be very left wing, And all these ideas are universal. They're universalistic. So there are ideas about being Jewish that fly in the face of that, like exclusivity, like moral and cultural superiority, to the extent that Israel is a morally better place than its Arab neighbors, that it's culturally more sophisticated and prosperous. These are all things that offend the sort of Jewish liberal leftist mindset. We have to be inclusive of everything. And to be Jewish by definition means there's a certain exclusivity to say, I have a different identity. I am not, people can convert to Judaism. Anyone could become Jewish, but you're part of this tribe, you're part of this culture, part of this history. And rather than taking pride in that, you take shame in that, because if it's not that positive a force in your life or central a force in your life to all of a sudden have to claim it, there's two different reactions. You run to it or you run away from it. And then you want to tell the people who want to be hostile to you to say, not me, not me. I'm shedding all that crap, but I'm still going to use my Jewish identity front and center to provide cover or to provide excuse. Because otherwise I'm ashamed. I think that's what's going on. And I know that can stir the pot for a lot of people, but I do think that's what's going on. People putting on a tallis when they attend an anti-Zionist protest. I don't know when else they wear it, but I would presume, and it's a guess, I'm happy to be proven wrong, that they're not wearing it regularly.
It's a prop for the protest itself, and I think, but also
now they're still ethnically Jewish. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. I'm not dismissing that. I'm not taking that away from that. I think some people you're not Jewish, or you're even a self-hating, the self-hating designation is bad because it's not so effective, because people think of it like the way they would look at black conservatives and say, you're not really black because of your political beliefs. But again, it's a little different for Jews, because Jews are not just strictly some race. There are Jews that hate Judaism. There are Jews that hate the community they come from, that hate all of it, that hate Israel. Norman Finkelstein, Noam Chomsky, the biggest critics of Israel today are all Jews. So there's always been that element of it. And to say that it's not akin, I think a lot of people in the West are confused by this. Well, all the left called these black conservatives self-hating blacks because they vote against their interest. I'm like, well, it's not the same thing. Because you're not hating, they don't hate their own ethnicity, but they hate what it entails, the practice, the ideas they hate. There are such things as Jewish ideas. I wouldn't say there are inherently black ideas or white ideas. There are ideas based in culture, religion, philosophy that extend from our people. That's not the same thing as an immutable characteristic. Even though you're born into that culture and born into that tradition, that's how we designate it. I think people just assume the racial component is all there is to it, and therefore no one can be self-hating because it's themselves. And it's not that they're self-hating; they hate the tribe that they were born into. That's very possible for people. So it's there, and whatever.
Yeah. Lastly, before I let you go, it's very late at night here, but in Israel, how, if we just take everything we spoke about this hour, I guess, more or less, how would you characterize the way looking forward? So the president, I was just reading that Netanyahu is, people are saying in the cabinet meetings, our Israel's world image has never been as bad as it is. And he says, no. Every time there's a war, during the war, Israel's image goes down. We'll finish the war. We'll get back to normal. America will come back to support us, the American public opinion. And for now, it's lucky we have Trump and this and that. I think, from my point of view, that it's very naive, because the I guess the way you look at the polls, the younger the person is, the more he hates Israel, and you just see the drop throughout. And just to think that if the war ends, suddenly all these people that have a negative view of Israel even before October 7th will suddenly love Israel or support Israel or vote for candidates that support Israel is a little bit naive. Maybe I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong. So how do you look at it? Is he right? Are you optimistic? Just in general.
I'm optimistic. I think if the war is over in a year, no one will care. They just don't care. Most of these people, they care to feel like they care about something. They care to feel virtuous. They care to condemn, so it gives them a sense of orientation and purpose. But they don't actually care. Most of the people talking about this, even on podcasts or whatever, whether they've been to Israel, do they know anyone there? Do they know that many Palestinians? Do they know that many Israelis? Let's just siphon off the people who have direct connection, familial, religious connection to this. Is that the majority of the protest movement or the outspoken sentiment? No, the fact is it's spread into the mainstream. How many people are talking about Iran right now and what happened? the Hezbollah pagers? Who's outraged about the Hezbollah pagers every day right now and what happened? Who's outraged about Fordo? You can't even remember Fordo. It was just in the news for a second. People care about their own lives, their own families, their own prosperity. They care about their own careers for the most part. So I'm optimistic in the sense that I thought if this war had been over in 4 months, we wouldn't be talking, you and me, right now. Like, it just wouldn't be front and center because a lot of it's just used as cover to distract from one's own personal responsibilities and goals, to get lost in this kind of thing. And if you look at most sort of mob mentality movements, a couple of years later, you look back and you go, wow, we really effed that up. Geez, there was a time when everybody cared about locking down and making sure we stayed inside lest we kill grandma. And this is the responsibility of our country. And COVID is the most dangerous thing. We have to fight it. We have to unite the world. Like, a couple of years later, and the mob mentality dies down. At that same time, do you remember how cops were killing minorities in droves every single year? This was an epidemic. This was happening. Are cops just not violent anymore? Did they stop just massacring minorities in the streets? I thought they were doing that back in when was it? I don't know. 2020? In 2020, 2021, I thought like the cops were just mowing people down in the street. Now, I know that sounds a little tone deaf with regard to ICE and all that stuff, but that hysteria too. There's a whole lot of hysteria that just trades movements and trades forms and evolves. It's the same parasitic thing that hops from movement to movement to movement to just channel the same angst. Okay. So the angst might be there, but it'll be on a different thing. The same, so I do think that largely big picture that will fade away. There is damage that's done, but again, like, if the truth is on your side and the truth is the truth, then it stays the long haul, and you have to do what's true and just and right and not prioritize approval of such things over accomplishing such things. Don't prioritize approval and the narcissism of the West that will always hate you. If you're doing what you feel is right and true, then trying to figure out how you're going to convince all these people that you have to, every nation understands that. You have to protect your civilians, your citizens, and that's how you get to peace. You have to defeat those who don't want peace. And I think Israel does it more damage and more disservice trying to play this Western game of winning in the Western PR while losing in the East militarily. Those two things feed into each other. You'll continue to lose in the West as you lose in the East. I'd rather prioritize winning in the East, and the West doesn't actually care the way you think it does.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, I agree. And I would just say that is about Israel, about the Jews in America and in Europe. There's really no more Jews except for maybe in France and a little bit in the UK. But the Jews in the US, I would say that it sounded like you felt differently about, like, it's not going in a good direction. And so,
yeah.
In
that sense, I'm more pessimistic. In the age of irrationality, all you need is a sort of populist left-wing version of Trump.
Yes.
If you pave the way for people making decisions conspiratorially, using irrationality and tribalism, blind tribalism, populism, while all this infighting is going on the right now in a post-right-wing victory, the movement gets so big and broad, the umbrella gets broad, and now it starts to fracture.
Yes.
It's too big, can't maintain itself, which just paves the way for all the mayoral races to go across the country to Zoran Mamdani's and to far left populism, as they're going to shed the whole social stuff like the trans issues, the other things that's divisive. They go to the economic populism and then Marxism. And I can see that happening in 2028, where a far left cult of personality figure rises.
God help us.
That makes me. I'm more pessimistic about that in general, because I don't know hopefully the American spirit, the culture, will resist that. I have some optimism there that there's something different about America and Americans. And when this all blows over, they'll look back and be like, wow, did we really even give the time of day to terrorist regimes and organizations that held people hostage? Did we really even think that maybe we wanted to blame Israel for that? It's just crazy.
Right.
But we're not there yet. So I have a combination, cautiously optimistic.
Ami Kozak, it was a pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate the time you gave us, and keep on fighting the good fight, and love watching your stuff. Guys, go to Ami's YouTube, subscribe to his YouTube, watch on his X account. I love your Tucker Carlson impressions, and watch him wherever he is. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you guys on our next episode. Thank you, guys.